All right, so I would love to transition us into the panel discussion now and invite our panelists to join us on camera. And in particular, I'd like to reintroduce Irma Guerra, who works at the Education Service Center Region 20 in Texas, and Emily Key, who's an elementary school principal and former director of English learner programs in Albuquerque. So we have identified some key discussion topics that our panelists will address, some things that have come up in the presentation today, some that have larger grounding in what has gone on in the world since March of 2020. And I'll direct some of the questions to a specific panelist, but I do invite all panelists to respond to all questions if you'd like. And then we'll have an opportunity at the end of the panel discussion to address questions that come through to us through the chat box. And we'll address as many as we can given the time that we have. So with that, I'll jump into the first question and specifically direct it to start out with to Emily. To what extent have you seen changes in English learner students' oral language development in your settings in light of the findings that we shared both from Texas and from the WIDA states?
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I think one of the biggest factors that has directly impacted oral language acquisition in our schools at this time is the lack of highly qualified practitioners within our classroom settings. As we know, language acquisition is carefully crafted by our practitioners to ensure that students have the opportunity to engage in that development process, which we know is not always linear. And so not having those highly qualified practitioners is something that is deeply affecting our students' acquisition and creating those low risk environments for them to practice their language acquisition. I think what we're seeing here in the school setting at the school level is that students do have a higher effective filter, that they are not engaging in academic discourse as much as we've seen in the past, and that new scaffolds are needed, new differentiation practices are needed. And to kind of pick up where we left off, you know, some students went to a different setting during the pandemic. Some students were at home. Some students, well, frankly, our enrollment dropped so much and we don't know where they went, but they're coming back with more of a limited or interrupted formal education lens. And so as educators, we have to be very responsive to that and make sure that we are addressing that accordingly.
Thank you, Emily. I wonder if Irma, you would want to bring the Texas perspective onto this question as well.
Yes, absolutely. So in the regional area, we've noticed, again, quite a bit of fluctuation in the development of oral language for the students. And it could be attributed to several factors, some of which you and Dr. Osman mentioned in your study. For sure the pandemic, but also some changes in the format of the way that the English language proficiency assessment, which we use here in Texas, TELPAS, has been given to the students. And so practitioners in the field are really having a hard time focusing their efforts because there's kind of some different things going on, and they're not quite sure what to really attribute it to. But just like Emily was saying, it's really important to go back to some of those practices that were pre-pandemic and thinking about the scaffolding and the opportunities that we provide for the students to develop their oral language. There is such an emphasis right now on really getting the students to practice their expressive skills and of course their receptive skills. And one of the things that we can do is take a deeper look at the level of language the students are engaging in. So it's not just about getting the students to provide a written response or provide an oral response, but it's also about looking very carefully at the level at which the students are responding and ensuring that they're using that high academic vocabulary.
And do you feel that there are important distinctions between what can be done or should be done at the elementary levels versus the secondary levels?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of different things to consider, only because typically at the elementary level, especially in the lower grades, you have self-contained classrooms. And so it's one teacher that can really provide that support continuously, especially when you're thinking about English language development and oral language development in particular. Once you get to departmentalizing, especially at the secondary level, it becomes a little bit more challenging because the students are, of course, exposed to different teachers, different learning styles, and also different teachers' comfortability levels with the different strategies and scaffolds. And so one of the things that is being explored heavily here in Texas is the concept of content-based language instruction, or CBLI, and really looking at how to create sort of a group of teachers that are highly qualified, highly specialized in the area of being able to scaffold language for students, and putting those students into certain pods where they have a teacher who specializes specifically in language strategies throughout the day. And that way it's not just on the English teacher, or it's not just on one teacher, but really the student is receiving that content scaffolded, language that's scaffolded throughout the day.
And I think that's an interesting intersection with what we heard from Melissa Castillo about, the push for dual language instruction and what that might be able to do to enable students access to content in ways that we don't typically think of as the most obvious. It's not just about scaffolding English language development, but also about enabling content access, whatever the medium, the linguistic medium might be. So turning a little bit away from the academic focus, or the language development focus specifically, and more generally to the social emotional effects of the pandemic, I wonder if, Emily, you could speak a little bit more to what you were saying about the affective filter and what you see more generally about, what needs to be acknowledged and understood with respect to the experiences that English learner students in particular seem to have had during the course of the pandemic.
Yes, I think it's important to remember that when we're talking about social emotional learning, there's a lot of vocabulary and academic language that goes hand in hand with that. And so when we're thinking about how to support our English learners, we need to be considerate of the fact that we really do need to ensure that students have accessibility to those tools. If we're using an SEL check-in, are they able to access that? Are students able to use expressive language to say how they're feeling in that moment? And so what we're seeing a lot of is students who feel stifled in their ability to express how they're feeling in the educational setting. And so I believe it's really important as we move forward to engage in a lot of compassion, empathy, and kindness with our students, in understanding that they've just had to navigate a pandemic in possibly a completely new country, a new language, and there's a lot of overstimulation happening for our students. So sometimes it's important to just limit language when students are having big emotions, or to provide really appropriate scaffolds when we are checking in and asking how they're feeling. That is one thing that we are practicing here at our site, making sure that whether the student speaks Dene, if they speak Uzbek, that we have the resources on hand to address them appropriately in a moment of crisis or in a moment of need. And not waiting until it gets to that point either, making sure that our SEL supports, just like our ELD supports, are integrated throughout the day. It's not just something that happens 45 minutes daily. We really need to make sure that our English language development is integrated into every single topic, every single lesson, and that includes SEL. And I think that helps students from feeling overstimulated, from feeling like they don't have a voice in that moment. And it allows students to kind of settle in, knowing that there will be an opportunity for them to express themselves appropriately.
I think that's so powerful, Emily, but the challenge that I'm hearing implicit in that Narek had also brought up, is that you need staffing to be able to accommodate that and to really engage in conversations with these students who have a wide variety of linguistic backgrounds. Some are Native American languages, some are from recent immigrants, and it's definitely a challenge. I would love to hear how your school has managed it as a way to, as maybe a model for other districts who are facing similar things. or at schools?
We're extremely fortunate here in Albuquerque Public Schools. As you know, we are a very large district, and that comes with challenges, but it also comes with lots of departmental support. And so we have our language and cultural equity department, which I had the opportunity to be a part of for the past 3 years. And we have a very robust translation interpretive support department that are able to step in when it comes to communicating with families. But as you know, a lot of this takes a lot of pre-planning effort and consideration among our practitioners, and just ensuring that if we didn't handle it appropriately this time, we need to ensure that there's protocols and practices and systems in place for our English learners to find success, or our multilingual learners to find success. Not only that, amplifying and honoring their stories and voices and validating and affirming their journey can really go a long way when it comes to students feeling comfortable and having the ability to freely express themselves throughout their school day.
Thank you. And that too reminds me of sort of the questions about diversity of the student population, and what we had reported in the study with David and I reported about differential reclassification rates that we were seeing in the wake of the pandemic. And I would love to hear, especially from your perspective, Irma, to what extent you think that the pandemic impacted students' prospects for reclassification, and then what can help them thrive, in or out of EL status, whether they're classified yet or not.
So we here in Texas have also seen, well, of course, we've seen a reduction in the reclassification rate overall, as noted by your study also. And some of the things that we can attribute that to, of course, are the pandemic and, that inability to really have language discourse at high academic levels. But then also there have been so many changes in the reclassification criteria here in Texas, as well as changes in the way that students are assessed. So because there have been kind of many things that are attributing to a lower reclassification rate, it makes it a little bit difficult. In fact, this year or this past year, we just had another change with writing. Now that is something that is assessed online in grades 2 through 12, and it's not a holistic rating as it has been in the past. So I think practitioners are really struggling with just the way that the English language proficiency is being assessed and how it's being used. As well as, of course, the challenges that come with coming out of a pandemic. This year, we are going to see that Texas is moving to using the composite rating for the English language proficiency portion of the reclassification criteria. And that is really bringing a lot of hope back to the educators as well as to the students. So students now across the 4 language domains have to reach the advanced high level. With the spring of 2024, as long as the students meet the advanced high level in the composite rating, and the caveat is they can't have anything below advanced, then for that particular section of reclassification, they will potentially be able to reclassify. And so those students that were kind of on the intermediate level, they have hope now that if they get to the advanced level, that they're really going to be able to make it across in that particular area. So that's very, again, hopeful for the students, hopeful for the practitioners for this coming year. There have been a lot of administrators that are really having a hard time with some of the students that maybe they're not doing, performing up to their potential with TELPAS, but then maybe they are scoring advanced levels in their state assessment. And so there's a little bit of difference there between the scores. And we're hoping with the students moving to the composite score for reclassification, that will even out and show higher levels of proficiency.
Yeah, that's very promising. Excuse me. I'm curious then, and this may be something that the WIDA team can speak to. We had a little bit of discussion about this already. Did English learner students from all of the linguistic and cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds experience the pandemic in the same way? I mean, from news articles, we understand that there were most likely differences, but do we have findings that can speak to that? What do we understand from the data about how we can sort of predict what things will look like into the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, and and like you said, we discussed this a little bit already. The differential impact of the pandemic on the diverse population of English learners. As we start examining the impact of the pandemic on various EL subgroups, we are seeing that the performance of ELs on standardized tests, at least, has been affected in different ways. Again, recalling that we're talking about system-wide aggregates and that results may look different from place to place, and they will look a little different from place to place. We already mentioned large disparities between the proficiency of Hispanic and non-Hispanic English learners pre and post the pandemic. We found large disparities between newcomer ELs and especially those ELs who are newcomers and Hispanic English learners. So with the post-pandemic cohorts, of course, coming in at a lower proficiency level than that of the pre-pandemic cohorts. Again, Native American and Pacific Islander students' scores have also experienced a negative impact. On the other hand, Asian, white, Black English learners' scores seem to have increased after the pandemic. So definitely different impacts on different subgroups. Of course, not based on their individual intersectionalities as much, but also how their specific multiple intersectionalities are in relationship with state, district, and school level policies and factors that interact with these subgroups differently. Generally, I would say that our results confirm that the students who were facing the steepest institutional barriers prior to COVID have seen the worst impacts and are carrying the heaviest burden. And it's not really, it is natural to expect. Negative shocks impact the most vulnerable students, people most, and that is what we are seeing in the data already.
So what is it that we can do? I mean, I'm curious what Emily and Irma might have to say. If we didn't know or weren't successful in in closing opportunity gaps before the pandemic, and now resources may be a little bit more abundant right now, but it's not going to last. And then we are facing what are just exacerbated opportunity gaps, widened opportunity gaps. What innovative approaches can we take? It sounds like really supporting student social emotional development makes a lot of sense. Integrating English language development with content learning makes a lot of sense. What are other very specific things that folks on this webinar might be able to take back to their own schools, districts, classrooms to try to build students up more?
Highly qualified instructional materials are important. However, it's the climate and culture that's going to dictate how that delivery lands with our English learners specifically, because our English learners do need to feel comfortable in their environment, in a place that's safe, where they feel comfortable taking that risk, trying that new word, trying a sentence. And if they need a support, they can look up and find that sentence stem there on the whiteboard or wherever you choose to put it. But I do believe that it all starts with climate and culture in the classroom setting. And that, as we know, takes a while to develop. And it does take a lot of years of practice and ensuring that your climate and culture is going to support your English learners despite where they're at in their journey towards English language acquisition. And again, you know, that takes collective teacher efficacy, as we know from John Hattie's work, that the ability for teachers to share ideas, to have conversations about what they're doing and what they're doing specifically that causes learning in their environments is extremely important, and has a high impact on our students.
I think additionally, on top of thinking about the climate and culture, which is very important, one of the things that I think that we can get better at is really thinking about partnerships with higher ed and school systems And I think also that need for continuous professional development. So lots of times as, you know, teachers are coming out of the college environment to, you know, being a practitioner, sometimes they really just need some of that real world experience, and to really have that to be able to craft, get better at their craft and really hone in on those skills. So I think the more that we have partnerships and start the conversations early, you know, before graduation, the better and more prepared the teachers are that we have. And then with that, just thinking about that lens of continuous learning and continuous growth. So with the changes that, you know, Emily has really stressed, especially with the social emotional aspect of learning and integrating that into the classroom, really thinking about how we can grow that effort with the teachers, with each other, because that is definitely, I wouldn't say a completely new aspect of learning, but it is something that we've been emphasizing a little bit more over the past couple of years. And so in order to stay relevant for the students and continuously meet their needs, we have to constantly just have that growth mindset, take inventory of what the needs are, how they're changing, and then think about how we can meet those using research-based practices.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good guidance. Really important to just reiterate all of those pieces, especially. Before we move on to probably one or two more questions, we have a little bit more time. I did want to ask those in the audience to please make sure that you complete our feedback survey, excuse me, before the end of this webinar. So you can access it from this link in the chat, or you can use the QR code on the screen. Excuse me. And it just takes a few minutes to complete, if that, and it's very important for us to hear from our audience on how we're doing. Thank you. All right, so please take a look at that while we are proceeding with the rest of our questions. Are there other systemic challenges we should think about, excuse me, that schools and districts may face?
One of the things that sometimes administrators, just systemically, I think with the way that administrators have to be an expert in so many things, and Emily, you can probably you know, chime in a little bit better on this aspect, but you know, there's so many different populations and so many different areas of expertise that you really have to understand, that sometimes that can be a challenge. We have seen several times, specifically with dual language programs, you know, a different administrator comes, and then there could be changes based on the administrator's understanding, or, you know, based on what they believe to be best practices. And so I think we have to think about how we're setting our programs up and how we're setting them up to be successful, regardless of kind of who's at the helm, or how do we support a new administrator when they come into the role to understand that climate and culture that's already been set in the school, to understand the program and the best practices within it, and not just kind of leaving them to figure those things out on their own.
Thank you for saying that, Irma. You really bring up a good point, and that is what we believe to be the aim of education here in the United States of America, because that's where it all comes down to is, are we creating facets and pathways for our bilingual and biliterate students to excel? And it's not just about becoming a translator one day, or you'll make a higher pay differential. It's about validating and affirming identities. And as my colleagues have stated on this webinar, the importance of acknowledging the intersectionalities that our multilingual learners face. You know, we have our dually identified students. We have students who experience navigating the arduous journey of low SES, you know, food scarcity and unhoused status, and all those things come into play and definitely play a part in our education system. And I think when we are considerate of all those factors and we develop a structure within our organization, whether it be at the school level, at the district level, or at the state level, that we value bilingualism and biliteracy to create a more global understanding and a higher cultural competence in our population. And that connection between our schooling institutions, K through 12, and higher education are very important. That has there's a lot of opportunity that lies there.
Thank you all for responding to these questions today. Lisa has just had to step away for a minute. I think you guys heard her coughing just there, so I am going to wrap us up here. I think this panel discussion has really been engaging, and we really want to thank our speakers and panelists today for their thought-provoking presentations and discussion, and thank all of you who attended. We hope you found the presentations worthwhile and relevant for the great work that you're doing to support the learning and development of children and youth. Again, we put the link to the feedback survey in the chat box. Please take a moment to complete it. I know you guys all get a lot of requests to complete surveys, but we are constantly trying to improve these events, and it is really helpful for us to hear from you. Also, we want you to check out what's new with the REL Southwest website. Our website has overviews of our studies, the one we talked about today, many more that we've completed. We also have infographics, videos, and published reports for you to check out. We also would love for you to sign up to join our newsletter if you haven't already signed up for that. And just really appreciate you joining us today. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I want to thank our wonderful panelists once again for this discussion, and David and the WIDA presenters for the great work that you did in sharing your results. And I also want to thank Lisa, who did a great job facilitating this webinar and presenting on the results from REL Southwest. So thank you, everyone, and we are going to go ahead and close.